December 7th, 1941. The harbor is quiet. It's 7:48 in the morning. The watch rotations are changing. Coffee is being poured in wardrooms across Battleship Row, and the 7 capital ships moored along the southeastern shore of Ford Island sit motionless in the still water, their hulls reflecting the early light. 183 Japanese aircraft are already inside Oahu's airspace. They completed their 230-mile transit from the Carrier Strike Group in disciplined radio silence, flying low enough to avoid the island's radar stations at Opana Point. The first wave carries 40 Nakajima B-5N torpedo bombers, 49 Aichi D-3A dive bombers, 50 Mitsubishi A-6M Zero fighters, and 49 Nakajima B-5N high-level bombers. The first torpedo enters the water at 7:55 a.m. By 9:55 a.m., 2,403 Americans are dead, 18 ships are sunk or damaged, and 347 aircraft have been wrecked or incapacitated. The Pacific Fleet ceases to function as an offensive force. But let's change one thing. Mounted on the stern of the USS West Virginia, a weapon exists that the Japanese strike planners have no intelligence category for, no defensive countermeasure against, and no operational experience with, something that was not manufactured anywhere on Earth until 1980. What if the West Virginia carried a solid-state directed energy laser system, specifically a 150 kilowatt fiber laser platform of the type the US Navy began testing in 2014 under the Laser Weapon System designation, or LAWS? Not a gun, not a missile, a beam of concentrated infrared light traveling at 300,000 kilometers per second, controlled by a fire control computer capable of burning through the aluminum airframe of a 1941 aircraft in under 4 seconds of sustained dwell time. The system itself requires precise description. The LAWS platform tested aboard the USS Ponce in 2014 produced a continuous wave infrared laser at a wavelength of approximately 1 micron. Output power in that configuration was 30 kilowatts, later upgraded to 150 kilowatts in subsequent developmental variants. For this scenario, the 150 kilowatt configuration is the system present. The beam produces no visible signature in dry air. The operator sees nothing leave the emitter. The target aircraft sees nothing approaching. There is no ballistic arc, no travel time to account for, no windage calculation. The beam reaches the target at the speed of light. The effective engagement range against aerial targets in clear atmospheric conditions is approximately 3 to 5 kilometers, roughly double the engagement envelope of the Mark 15 Phalanx CIWS. The system tracks targets using an electro-optical and infrared sensor package, not unlike the targeting pods carried by modern strike aircraft, slewing to maintain continuous beam contact as the target moves through the engagement volume. The physics of what happens when a 150 kilowatt beam contacts an unarmored 1941 aircraft deserve the same precision applied to everything else here. The Nakajima B-5N torpedo bomber that would have placed the weapon detonating the Arizona's forward magazine is constructed of aluminum alloy over a steel frame with fabric control surfaces. Total airframe weight is approximately 3,800 pounds empty. The skin thickness of the fuselage in the primary structural sections runs between 0.8 and 1.2 millimeters. At 150 kilowatts of continuous wave infrared energy concentrated on a spot roughly 30 centimeters in diameter at 2 kilometers, aluminum reaches its melting point in under 3 seconds. At 4 seconds of sustained dwell, primary structural members fail. At 5 seconds, if the beam contacts the fuel tank, the aircraft is no longer airborne. The engagement geometry matters. The first wave torpedo bombers approach Battleship Row at altitudes between 40 and 60 feet above the water surface, flying at approximately 160 miles per hour, or roughly 71 meters per second. At 5 kilometers of range, that aircraft is 70 seconds from weapon release. The laser fire control system requires the incoming aircraft at that distance, establishes a track solution, and slews to maintain beam contact. A 5-second dwell at 3 kilometers is sufficient to destroy the aircraft before it closes to 2.6 kilometers. At 160 miles per hour, the B-5N covers the distance from first engagement to the point where it would have been released its torpedo in just under 90 seconds. The system has that 90 seconds to work with. Against one aircraft approaching in a straight line at constant altitude, the engagement is not uncertain. The outcome is structural structural failure before weapons release. The engagement becomes more complicated when the full attack geometry is considered. The first wave carries not one torpedo bomber, but 40. They approach in coordinated formations, assigned to specific targets along Battleship Row, separated laterally by distances ranging from 200 to 500 meters. The laser system can engage one aircraft at a time. It cannot split its beam. A single LAWS emitter slews between targets sequentially, not simultaneously. If each engagement requires 5 seconds of dwell time plus 2 to 3 seconds of slewing and reacquisition, the system can service roughly 8 to 10 targets per minute in ideal conditions. Against 40 inbound torpedo bombers arriving across a 4-minute attack window, one system on one ship is engaging somewhere between 32 and 40 individual targets before any reach their release points. The LAWS draws approximately 300 kilowatts of input power at the generator bus, accounting for efficiency losses in the beam generation chain. The system can sustain continuous operation for as long as the ship's engines are running and undamaged. The attack. The first torpedo bombers descend to wave height at approximately 7:55 a.m. The laser fire control sensor package acquires the leading formation at 5 kilometers. It begins tracking. No human is calculating intercept geometry. The electro-optical system is logging angular rate, closing velocity, and estimated release point for each aircraft simultaneously, queuing them in engagement priority order based on time to weapon release. At 3 kilometers, the system opens fire. The B-5N assigned to the West Virginia is flying straight and level, holding its attack run. 5 seconds. Structural failure in the forward fuselage. The aircraft rolls left and impacts the harbor surface 800 meters short of the ship. The torpedo it was carrying does not leave the aircraft. The system is already slewing to the next target in the queue. The engagement proceeds down the queue. The LAWS on the West Virginia is defending a radius determined by its slew rate and the angular dispersion of the incoming strike package. One system on one ship establishes a defended sector. The width of that sector at 3 kilometers of range, given the system's field of regard of approximately 270 degrees in azimuth, covers a substantial portion of the incoming attack corridor, but not all of it. The high-level bombers present a different problem. The B-5N high-level bombers approach at 10,000 feet, releasing 800-kilogram armor-piercing bombs in coordinated groups. They're not flying at wave height. They're not on a fixed straight-line approach to a specific release point. Their approach path to the release point is longer, and their altitude places them at a different thermal and optical path through the atmosphere. Water vapor and aerosol content in the marine boundary layer at Pearl Harbor in December creates measurable atmospheric attenuation of the laser beam. At 10,000 feet of altitude and 3 kilometers of slant range, the slant path through the atmosphere is longer than a horizontal engagement at the same ground range. Effective power on target is reduced by 10 to 20% under typical tropical maritime conditions. The system remains lethal. It takes 6 to 7 seconds of dwell instead of 5. Against slow, straight, predictable formation approaches, 6 to 7 seconds per aircraft is still within the engagement window. The Zero fighters present the most challenging problem of the engagement. The Mitsubishi A6M has a maximum speed of approximately 332 miles per hour at altitude, roughly 148 meters per second. At that closing velocity, the window from first engagement at 3 kilometers to target arrival is just over 20 seconds. The laser requires 5 seconds of sustained dwell to destroy the airframe. A Zero flying a straight attack run gives the system sufficient time. A Zero beginning evasive maneuvers after the first aircraft ahead of it in formation begins to come apart behaves differently. The pilots in the second and third positions watch the aircraft ahead of them fail without any visible explanation. No flak burst, no tracer fire, no apparent source. The instinct of the trained fighter pilot is to break formation and maneuver. A maneuvering aircraft at 332 miles per hour and 3 kilometers of range is a harder tracking problem. The system's electro-optical sensor tracks angular motion. Fast lateral brakes at close range can exceed the slew rate of the beam director. Some percentage of maneuvering Zeros will survive the engagement envelope. The outcome. The Oklahoma still takes torpedo hits. The Arizona, at the far end of Battleship Row from the West Virginia, is outside the primary defended sector for the first several minutes of the attack. The forward magazine detonation at 8:06 a.m. may still occur. The ground attack component of the first wave proceeds essentially unchanged. What changes is the torpedo attack geometry on the western side of Battleship Row, the West Virginia. In the historical historical record takes 6 torpedo hits and sinks to the harbor bottom. In this scenario, the torpedoes assigned to the West Virginia are not completing their runs. The ship is either undamaged or significantly less damaged than the historical record shows. The USS Tennessee, moored inboard of the West Virginia, benefits indirectly because the West Virginia does not capsize against her. The second wave arrives at 8:54 a.m. By that point, the LAWS system had been operating continuously for roughly 55 minutes. The thermal and management systems are within operational parameters, assuming no battle damage to the cooling infrastructure. The second wave carries 54 Nakajima B-5N high-level bombers and 78 Aichi D-3A dive bombers, 80 Zero fighters, and no torpedo aircraft. The attack profile shifts to dive bombing, which presents a different geometric problem. Dive bombers approach at steep angles from high altitude, which places them in the laser's engagement volume for a shorter period during the terminal phase of their dive. The system is still effective. It is less efficient per engagement than against the horizontal torpedo run profile. The second wave engages a partially altered harbor defense, with American anti-aircraft batteries now fully crewed and firing. The combined effect of laser engagement on inbound dive bombers and heavy anti-aircraft fire from shore batteries and surviving ships produces higher Japanese aircraft losses in the second wave than the historical record shows, which was 29 aircraft lost in the second wave historically. Japanese after-action reports from the returning pilots describe something the intelligence officers reading those reports cannot immediately classify. A weapon on one ship that produced no visible discharge, no tracer signature, no muzzle flash, and no sound detectable over the ambient noise of battle, yet caused aircraft to fail structurally at ranges well outside the effective envelope of any known shipboard gun system. The B-5N crews who survived reported aircraft ahead of them rolling and falling without apparent cause. The Zero pilots who flew through the defended sector and returned to the carriers reported no incoming fire that they could identify or evade. The Gumo's staff reviewing these accounts aboard the Akagi that afternoon has no framework for the weapon being described. Nothing in their technical intelligence files corresponds to what the surviving pilots are attempting to explain. That same morning, the president asks Congress for a declaration of war. Young men receive conscription letters within 7 days.